morning, and thank you for joining us. I am Lisa Schwartz with ITSM Academy. Today, it is my true pleasure to invite one of my, he has become a real life friend over all the years that we have known and collaborated together, Sean McClean. Sean is the master trainer for one of the world's most innovative tech companies. He has 30 years plus of experience in training, coaching, facilitating, mentoring, and I'm adding this piece, just overall rocking, because Sean is a giver and he loves to share his knowledge, and that's what we're here to do today. He has all kinds of other very impressive background and skills, but there's his LinkedIn, and if you'd like, just pick up your phone and use the QR code, and you can follow Sean on LinkedIn. So, Sean, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for giving me the chance. I'm super excited about the conversation we're about to have. There's just so much stuff that you and I kind of noodle with and talk about. So excited for that.
Sean, tell us what we're going to talk about today while I figure out my technical issue.
Totally fine. Yeah, one of the things we really want to spend some time talking about power skills today. Now we've got an agenda slide, so the funny thing is, well, you're liable to see this again, but I really do want to kind of get to this idea that power skills they're squishy, right? We hear about power skills, or you may hear about them as soft skills, or you may hear about them as communication skills, but what are they? There are hundreds of them, right? And which ones are we going to deal with? I really want to frame a couple of things though, and that is, there are hundreds of things we could consider power skills. We're going to focus on just a couple, the listening side and the communication side. But to make that really have value to, and things that you can take away, really to me, it will help the most if you contribute. I'm going to share something in a few minutes that's actually an open doc. It's a Google Doc, so I hope that everybody can access that. But one of the things we do when I facilitate sessions is to try to point out that in any session, all of the participants have the opportunity to make that session unique. So if you all throw some of your ideas, your favorite podcast related to power skills or communication, the thing that you learned that might have some context, one of the questions or problems you have into that doc, we'll wind up with a doc that all of us can walk away with. That's a takeaway that's more than just the slides that I put together and Lisa helped make look pretty. So I'm going to put that in the chat so that you all can see it. It's open, so you can just type ideas, questions, or whatabouts right in the doc. And remember that you're kind of building this too. It's your takeaway from this session that's more than just the labs. And right now it'll have 20 at least ideas and contributions from you all, as well as just the things that Lisa and I wanted to bounce around. Ooh, and look, our poll is out there.
First poll is up, and that's so what we're talking about today, being the power skills, is kind of coming up. All of us called that soft skills. And then all of the sudden, I started in my day job, I started hearing lots of people moving from soft skills to power skills. And then Sean and I are in an IT service management community together, which toward the end of the presentation, I'm going to share out the link to the community as well. We meet every Friday morning, and it's a group of international service management thought leaders. I do that because that's what people call Sean and I. Sean is, Lisa's not. And a whole bunch of practitioners as well. So anyway, in that group, everyone's been talking about power skills. And I said to Sean, when, how, where did it happen? And I love it, just in concept before I even dove into it at all. And it's kind of the reason that I wanted Sean to do this today, because I've read a few articles, but there's nothing like learning from Sean McClean. So, and Sean, I'm going to stop this sharing. I'm going to share the results. And so there's kind of a mix of people that looks like one person certainly knew that it happened, and it was, in a couple of people's conscious, and a new concept for a couple of other people. So I'm gonna move us forward. And if you could talk, Sean, when you sent me the slide deck, A Brief History of the Word, it made me laugh. So I hope everybody gets a giggle.
So yeah, and somebody in the chat had mentioned they asked about a link. The link that we were sharing is just an open Google Doc, and to kind of restate or reframe, I'd like you to be on that doc. There are kind of some summary notes as well as some of the references for this conversation. But if there are questions, the doc is editable. So go in there and write. If there's something that you're like, ooh, if you haven't checked this out, check this out. But yeah, just based on the poll results, which I love, it looks like for the majority of you, hearing about where this whole power skills, soft skills thing came from would be kind of handy. So, or something you didn't know before. So what I'm going to tell you is that soft skills actually came from the military in the 60s from an engineering document. One of their engineering handbooks talked about that skill set that didn't involve interaction with machines. And I think that really is kind of telling. That little quote from Whitmore on the early engineering docs in the military was kind of getting to the idea of, we know there's something you got to be good at, but we don't know what to call it. Now, it was kind of what we called it forever, was soft skills. That ability to communicate. And probably most of you are familiar with it from that context. You know that it's, there's soft skills, that ability to, manage interaction. Some people think about those types of things as charisma. Some people think about those as, oh, they're just great at all those soft skills things. But when it gets to that, what are they and where are they? We started pushing them out to power skills pretty recently. If you look, Udemy posted and did an article that kind of was really big on making them power skills, because they were saying for the hiring and the job process, it became very, very important. But the person who really, I think, got nailed down into saying this the best was Josh Bersin. And Josh Bersin's take on this, I absolutely love, but I want to take it one step deeper for all of us thinking about using these skill sets. Hard skills are actually soft. They're quote unquote easy. They're not always easy in the context of, depending on what things you're studying, but generally hard skills involve study. You study, you take a test, you pass the test, and you do the thing repeatedly. The thing about hard skills, though, is they obsolete themselves all the time, right? They disappear, and then Fortran is no longer a hard skill that we probably use. C is probably less popular than it used to be, though it comes back from time to time. Those things we might consider hard skills. Soft skills, though, they're different. They're actually hard. They're not learned in this classic sense of learning math or learning coding, or even learning ITIL. Soft skills are things that only are learned through constant practice, constant review, and constant refinement. And so I really liked that Bersin kind of brought that out. But when we start thinking about that, then we get to the idea that, we need to put them in a way that makes people realize that they're actually one of the highest and most important hireable contexts today. If we look at articles from Forbes and Glassdoor and several of those places, and a few recent studies that I think we posted in the notes, this skill set is what leadership is looking for in bringing people in, because we can teach them or give them online classes for the quote unquote hard skills. You can take YouTube videos or online anything in your own time to pick those up. But these power skills are the practice, continually working on, continually tweaking and adjusting. So that is, that's kind of the history of that. And I'm hoping that you're walking away going, one more thing that I knew before. Looks like we've got a question, though, and I want to throw to that too. I'm looking to see, I see the hand up, so I didn't know who. Keisha, you've got a question.
Keisha, can you chat that question in for us, please? Sean, hopefully she'll be able to do that. And, looking at this and talking to you about this, the other thing that I realized is it's a very ingrained in that someone who has and hones and works on their soft skills, their listening, their leadership, all of those things. This is just my opinion, but they're they're great team members. They're people who you want to work with, who you want to collaborate with. So, learning power skills early in the career and always keeping focused on that, I think, in a way, is going to help escalate through your career because you're going to get great references and your old boss is going to want to hire you or recommend you to a buddy or
Yeah.
so just the base of power skills. And I don't know that anyone, and I didn't, I mean, this kind of occurred to me this morning, but so I didn't have a chance to do any research, but wouldn't that be fascinating to go back and look at the careers of, sort of two groups of people, those who focused on
Mm,
hard and those who focused on soft skills. And from a revenue perspective, from a happiness perspective, all of those things, what that looks like. So I'll
that
have
would
to
be
take a look.
awesome.
It would be interesting. A little hard to correlate, perhaps, but lots of empirical data, I think, could be found. So,
Yeah. Well,
um,
to me, the other thing about these power skills, and I love that they were marketing it that way or pushing it that way, kind of as a, um, I think globally we're seeing that push towards calling them power skills because the other piece is soft skills because they're soft and squishy. A lot of times people think you have them or you don't. And I'd love to see if like how many of you that are here on this webinar session are going, yeah, but you either have them or you don't. But that's not at all the case. And just as you're pointing out, Lisa, there are things that if you're conscious of, you can practice and improve. It's just not practiced and improved like reading a book, memorizing the answers, and taking a test. They're only learned through that practice and the ability to kind of review and go back. I'll tell you, as someone who's done a lot of training, one of the things that's been most impactful for me was, having to adjust in the training environment first from they call it in teaching, they call it the change from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. In, Socrates' time when guys stood up on rocks and robes and spouted brilliance at people, that was all you needed. And in colleges and universities, I hate to say this, at some point, a lot of times that idea of I'll just stand here and lecture to you was good enough. But over time, that method of communication, that soft skill of I know how to public speak, has changed to if you want to public speak now, you have to engage the participants. And that's a skill change. I wasn't born with the ability to public speak. I practiced. And then as that practice happened, I had to change to go, I have to get people more engaged. And it's really important to do that. So this is a skill set also that's useful, as Lisa's pointing out, because it's always evolving. So you have to always stay conscious and always be working on it. So speaking of which, that brings Lisa to another one that's really good in terms of that training. I was fortunate enough to take, some classes in that, but the practice of it is something I'm curious to see where everyone else fits in. How much formal training have you had? Oh, look at this.
zero being training, what? And
Right?
5, like I've worked for awesome organizations who have seen the wise investment of training in this.
Yeah.
Or I, as a person, as a human being, see it. And I've done a lot of, my own, whether it's LinkedIn or Udemy or YouTube's or, as I said once to my niece, on flower arranging, I took a master class. And by that, I mean, I spent 2 hours on the YouTube, right? All
I
right.
love
So
this.
we sell
John
people.
Worthington
Yeah.
brings up this idea of and you're right, experiential learning is a huge factor, I think, in all of the power skill sets. But and to me, some of it's also conscious practice, right? Deliberate practice and review of the combinations. I can guarantee you when I'm done this, and Lisa will probably roll her eyes about it, but I'm gonna send her an email and tell her to tell me 3 things that I could that worked well, but also 3 things that I could do to improve or things that she noticed this time. And I do that every time I work with people as they go, hey, go back but it's that conscious practice of the skill that makes it so much harder than the classic hard skill of I read, I memorize. So like John's saying, that experiential aspect, but being conscious and practicing it is very deliberately is very cool and very important.
I
Looks like. Sorry,
I
go ahead.
I'm going to share that I'm sharing the results here, and while I do that, or before we, do you remember? I think one of the reasons, first of all, you have that feedback loop for yourself, for your personal improvement, your personal branding, if you will, in place. And the reason that's so effective for you is because somebody along the way, whether it was your mom or your dad or a boss or a mentor, somebody taught you how to ask for and assimilate constructive criticism. Do you have a memory of what that was? Why you're so good at that?
Yikes. That's
Sorry
funny.
to put you on the spot.
Nice. Yeah, no, but I'm like, I, this sounds funny, but I remember this will, I remember telling my daughters, as my daughters were, you have that, everybody has that icebreaker. What, if you had a superpower, what would it be? And I remember having that conversation with my daughter, and my daughter was like, well, what would your superpower be? And I said, sweetie, my superpower would be I get better from feedback. And she kind of went, huh? And I was like, well, if you get better at anything you do from getting advice, then you would never stop getting better. And eventually and she was like, oh, wow. And that was the
A
first time I
good
remember like,
superpower, Dad.
but that was the first time I remember consciously taking it as this is a thing and this is a thing we should actually pursue. And so, it was maybe 15 years ago, but it hit me after that. Well, and I wrote an article about this when I realized a professor that I had taken classes when classes were first virtual. And we didn't have video cameras, so you couldn't. And I was going back to take a graduate level class, and the first thing the person did was tell everybody on the voice message how important he was, how amazing he was, how skilled he was, and how honored we should all be to listen to him. And at the time, I was probably 20 years into my career, doing very fine for myself. And much like you're talking about some of the classes you've been taking, it was just for fun. And I was listening to this guy kind of berate everybody, and I was going, I don't want to be him. And then it also occurred to me that I was, from a presentation perspective, I was like, he's really just delivering my pizza. He's bringing knowledge to me. He's not quite as, his only job is to bring knowledge, and I'd better get better at figuring out how to do that better if I want to keep doing this. Because someday we're just going to listen to people's recordings, which today we do with YouTube. So I think that's a kind of where I started hitting that. I'm just looking at the chat and going, I love this. And I love Danielle's comment about growing skills through conferencing. I'm just putting out a series now on submitting for conference topics. And last year I did a thing on how to get the most out of conference topics. But I think, to Danielle's point, that actual taking that step out is just crucial to improving that skill set. There's some books I put in the back end of that for people who may be a little more nervous about interacting and networking, by a person who actually was what they call CAM-AP, or communication apprehensive. She's she jokes about being a registered introvert, but she's learned to kind of manage networking. The woman's name is Vanessa Van Edwards, and she writes several different books on how to practice those networking, communication, and listening skills to tune them to a fine degree. So,
well, and Sean, I have to jump in here because, as you know, my first job out of college, I found, which was a long time ago, I found HDI, and we did not have a chapter in South Florida. And I founded the chapter in South Florida. It is how I met Donna Knapp. It's how I became great friends with a whole bunch of people. But beyond that, ITSM Academy celebrated our 20th anniversary in January. My original co-founder, who is now retired, that's how I met her, was through HDI. I reached out to her boss because he had come to one of our early meetings, and I said, I need more people, I need more practitioners. And he said, well, you want to talk to our service desk manager. And so if it weren't for the HDI chapter and networking, I mean, not necessarily just HDI, but pick a thing. And it's how I started my company and have lived a very happy life training hundreds of thousands of people. It's like, it's amazing what networking can do. So I had to put in my personal. So that's what's in it for me. But now, Sean, let's talk about what's in it for everybody in terms of power skills.
yeah, and I love this. And Danielle's saying also early days of HDI, and everywhere I go, it seems like HDI chapters are kind of uh, founding founding starters for almost every community I've kind of seen. But yeah, this brings me to that, which I think is on the next slide, which is what, with him, what's in it for me in terms of learning the power skills. We already talked about the idea that these power skills can be constantly on increasing demand in jobs and opportunities. But really, I'm going, can we bump to the next slide? I'm looking to see.
I'm seeing the next slide.
It's past the brief history of. Maybe
Uh-huh.
it's just not my system.
Everybody else? I was so slick about it too. I slid it right in. Oh, no. All right. Let's reshare because I am certainly seeing it.
Kirsten, I'm bummed that you're not seeing the slides.
Okay, hold
Mostly
on.
because I'm
Let me,
not very good at interpretive dance, so I can't be doing the slides in that interpretive dance method.
there we go.
Now I see a wood panel. There we go. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So in terms of what the power skills are, and I do want to get to this, but I cannot say enough that the quality of any kind of interaction is based on the feedback we get in the chat, on the document, in any of those areas. So I really want to encourage you to answer to that question. But in general, we identify power skills early on. Nina and Lisa ran this content through ChatGPT, and they came up with a list of like 15 different power skills relevant to ITSM, which in an hour we're never going to hit. But the key power skills include things like listening, communication, networking, which we kind of already have touched upon. But in terms of where they come from, I'd be interested to know not just where they come from, but where do you apply them? So I'd love to hear your comments in the chat. Where do you think these power skill sets have the most relevant application? In your day-to-day job, where do you use them? If you're level 1 support, is it on the phone? Is it in talking to stakeholders? Is it in managing change for your organization? I'd love to see some of those in the chat. While we're at it, I also want to throw out, and Lisa had talked about some of the different applications of where those power skills fit. You may have noticed I bolded the listening, mostly because one of my favorite quotes, again in a book that I referenced called "You're Not Listening" by a journalist, Kate. I can't remember her last name, but there it is everywhere. Service desk manager. We're starting to see some feedback, but one of the interesting things, and the reason I bolded listening in particular, was because she points out that though you can get a degree in interpersonal communication and public communication, both of which I have, there are no degrees at all in listening. So we have lots of degrees in talking, but no degrees in listening. So that was part of why we focused on the webinar series to put some of these pieces first. But we're seeing some of the results, and these are great. Whether working with coworkers or strangers, power skills are not all about need to listen to understand and understanding the perspective. I love some of this, particularly as we're talking about listening. Two of the tools that we're going to bring up in the next slide are tools that I'm curious as to whether you've heard of, but I'm hoping as takeaways, there'll be things that if you haven't seen them before, you'll be able to leverage them. John, you mentioned that. I struggle with it too. So I'm going to bring those out there in. Oh, I love that, Paula. Toastmasters is a great one. And Regina, in terms of a place to practice those skills. And some of these call outs, the fact that the power skills are just as applicable at home as they are in the professional space. So I'm curious to see, and we don't even have to do a poll with this. If you find the greater than less than keys on your keyboard, and there's 30 plus of you, so I'd love to see 30 greater than less than. If you already have heard of ALLO as this format, ask, listen, observe, and empathize, then go ahead and put a greater than in the webinar chat. And if you know it a lot, like you know it inside and out, give me like 3 greater thans. Okay, so we're starting to see, and the cool thing about doing this in the chat, this is something you can do if you're doing webinars as well, is you can look at your own responses and see, okay, most of the participants are not familiar with ALLO as a method or a tool. So my hope in this listening piece of this conversation is that in addition to us all just kind of talking about it and you seeing your own responses in the chat and going, ooh, I want to take that away. Looking at things like Allo, that's a takeaway tool. That's one you can take with you and take home and go, I might apply this. So let me talk about Allo briefly. Yeah, okay. When it's funny, John, you would know this too, because I believe David Barrow also uses it. We leverage this in a class we run with ServiceNow called APOM, a Platform Owner's Mindset. And we actually have the opportunity to practice it, kind of based on that concept that regardless of what technology you're doing, you need to learn to do this. Now, in the ITSM Academies format, they have, and Lisa, you can help me, it's a certified process
Design engineer.
design engineer. Thank you. But when we go to design process, part of that means talking to and listening to the stakeholders of that process to help design it and manage it in a way that could be potentially automated, or have places where you can identify choke points and weak spots and all of those things. So part of that listening skill is learning how to listen correctly. So in that context of Allo, then we have that idea of ask, listen, observe, and empathize. This sounds really funny, but sometimes when I'm going into specifically do interviews where I'm trying to pull requirements or stories for an implementation, I will put this right in front of my face. Like I'll write it on a notepad. Ask, listen, observe, and empathize. Because if I have that in front of me, I'll be conscientious of managing, in particular, observing and empathizing. Now, one of the things I will mention with empathy is a lot of people think that empathy puts us right back in that soft skills and squishy kind of world. Empathy isn't necessarily like the tell me how you feel about that we hear from like therapists or those pieces. Empathy is trying to understand their context. So when we get to the ask, listen, observe, and empathize, in the empathize piece of things, we're trying to figure out what it's like to be them. And particularly in things like doing process design, the better we are at getting to that empathy piece, the more we'll find is that drives us right back around to ask, right? Because if we get to empathy and we're like, I don't quite get it, then we ask again. And so when we look at Allo in that context, we can leverage them and kind of go through. Now, that whole ask again probably gets to one that I'm sure you all are familiar with in terms of listening. That other tool, the 5, anyone else know? You've probably heard this in almost every like major YouTube video, 5 somethings. No? Yeah, there we go. Right? But going through those 5 whys in an ask, listen, observe, and empathize modality can get you some deeper insights. And really, this is the thing that we're looking for. And this brings us to the idea of the other tool out there, an insight resume. An insight resume looks a lot like a classic story. As a who, I need what, so that why. However, when we go to an insight resume, what we're looking to do is find the things that people don't always notice. What can you learn that no one else has? What can you see that no one else has gotten to? What can you derive that maybe people haven't observed before? And this is where Allo can come in. It's those things that give us those amazing insights. In the APOM class, one of the things we talk about that's fascinating is kind of the rise and fall of Lego. And Lego is a very interesting story. The company kind of was on the downside until a gentleman by the name of Jürgen von Nutztrup came through. And one of the things he did was he observed people playing with the toys. And the big insight that he had about it was it's not about the colors of the blocks or the sides of the bricks. People don't play with them to put the blocks together. They put them together to feel mastery. And that's when Lego started putting together kits like the Death Star or the big fancy Legos. And that was actually the change for Lego's progress in their career or their journey. They started becoming more successful because when they did the observe and empathize, they put themselves in the roles of the people playing with them. And they found that not just children got into Lego, and they weren't getting into them for the reason they thought. And that's where we can get great insights. And that's why Allo matters. That's also why using Allo in context with an insight resume could be useful. Okay. I'm looking to see notes just to see anyone
I'm just,
know. Go ahead.
oh, I've just been like delighted with what you're saying, and I'm just putting in fun little comments. And I will say quickly, seriously, little aloe plants would be great team employee gifts for Earth Day, which is coming up April
Oh,
22nd. And my first thought actually was, customer service week, which is a huge thing for a lot of our clients. It's a whole week in October, baby aloe plants for that. I mean, and a whole fun campaign and tie-in. So anyway,
that's perfect. I love that. Well, and it's interesting because Lisa and I bounced back a book that she gave to me that I absolutely fell in love with. It was called Alchemy. And another one of those areas where insights come into play. If I were to give you a drink that tasted, we're not going to do that on a webinar. It tasted horrible. And he said, if I were to tell you that they were going to turn that drink into the most popular drink, even more popular than Coca-Cola, or any of the other soda beverages, you would think I was crazy. But using aloe and insight, they were able to determine the way to market and sell that drink because they got unique insights to it. So
it's
part of that,
very, sorry, Sean, I was just going to say it. It's very similar. What Jurgen did and I never put this together before today, is very, very similar what the lady who started Build-A-Bear did.
yeah,
Isn't that interesting? Both around kids' toys that ended up with huge adult appeal
yep,
because people used and thought out of the box.
yeah, yeah. And I think that level, getting those insights is a matter of digging down into things. And that's kind of where we get into this idea of framing. For me, and I still practice this and I'm still bad at it. I still ask all of my people around me to help me work on it and improve it. Because I come from a classic teaching background. I'm used to telling great stories to get people engaged in listening, but that doesn't necessarily mean listening to their insights. So kind of as John was saying, I have to tune myself to that. And part of that is actually setting the frame. So it's not always about what you're saying, but it's about how you're going to say it and how you're going to frame it. So a lot of times if I'm going into a listening mode and what I'm looking for is to get that thing that's, beneath the top of the iceberg, because that's where all the great insights are, then what I'm doing is I kind of set my brain and try to channel my inner Sherlock Holmes or my inner, I forget the guys from Psych. But I try to also not just frame my own aspect on listening, but to frame the audience. And that's something that we can use as we flip from the listening side of things to the communication side of things. That's another skill set that we can really leverage and put it in my toolbox and use it. Determine before we go into communications how we want to frame that with people. I tried to do that in this session. There was a webinar, it's not quite the same as a class, but you may have noticed at the very beginning, I talked a lot about how important it was and how much we get out of everybody else sharing. So that kind of framing can be an important thing regardless of what it is you're trying to share. But putting it in that context in terms of how and what the expected results are key aspects to a lot of communication that we miss, particularly when we talk about things like change management. When we talk about changing, in particular, many of us in the space in ITSM would move from either one set of platforms to another, one set of processes to another, but we're dealing with change of things, which can be difficult to people. Most of the time, if we look at that change from a aspect of, status quo and change that we're interacting and downside and upside, everybody tends to talk about these two quadrants. They go, well, this is the downside of things the way it is now, and this is how good it'll be later. But we never really get to the other four, or the other two. If we frame conversations and go, look, we also have to recognize these pieces. This conversation, there are some things that aren't going to change with this change. There are some things that aren't going to get better immediately with this change. Or, though we make this change, these are some great things. These are some things that will stay the same. That aspect of framing the conversation for something that is specific like change is very different than now we're doing training and you all have to learn this process, which is a different kind of framing than we're trying to gather stories. So I want your contributions to be key. So that's the doc that I shared, was a sample template for facilitation where it's encouraging everyone else to share content. But as we think through what type of communication we go to, spending a moment to figure out how we want to frame that with people can be a key contributor. And Lisa just
And
threw
I
that
just
doc in.
reshared that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you'll see in that doc, what I kind of did was, and I use this you'll see that it's this template. Feel free to copy it and change it to modify yours. If I'm doing group meetings in which I really need people to be engaged, I will spend a lot more time framing it. Excuse me, but I'll go back and I'll review it. If this were a full day session or a workshop, I would come in on the break and I would go through that doc and slide down on it and say, oh, and look, here's some ideas from, or here's some ideas that, were in red. So clearly there are things that people want to add more to. Why don't we spend a minute talking about that? So building something to facilitate that kind of collaborative communication is great if the kind of communication we're using is one in which we want their collaboration. Sometimes it's not always the purpose, but spending a few minutes kind of thinking that out and using those kind of tools can be handy. I'm looking through this and seeing some great comments, and I'm seeing some ads. What I'll also tell you down there's a reference section where I put some of the book references. I'd love for you to add your best podcast, your best resource, your best blog to go to for that doc. So now I think we've got 3 or 4 takeaways, right? The history of soft skills. On the listening side of the house, Allo and the insight resume, in which we know that the insight resume is not just as who, I want, what, so that why, but understanding context through Allo. And now we have the framing, and we have a kind of framing document. So now we get to kind of some of those last little bits. Now in that section, we had Lewin's force field model, which is another tool that we can use. And you can look that up on the web essentially, but a lot of times in some engagements, they'll use Lewin's force. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. But Lewin has a lot of change modeling components. But essentially what they do is they work in a group and they'll brainstorm and say, these are the forces that will support this change. These are the forces that are pushing away from this change. But the cool thing about doing a conversation using that force field model is once we put those things on the map, we can determine which of those things can't be adjusted or impacted at all. These are forces pushing that are restraining this change, and there's nothing we can do about it. These are things that we can adjust. Okay, what can we do to move them over to the other side to become either less impactful or more in support of? And the same thing with the driving forces. Once we build them on a map of restraining forces and driving forces, we can then use our collaborative skills to brainstorm how we can adjust those forces to make things more in favor of moving towards the change that we need to make happen. So I think those are 5 tools and takeaways.
I think so too.
All right.
And I'm going to move to that slide. I was not familiar with Lewin's force field analysis, and I only got to do a very shallow, we can't call it a dive. I did a small little wade, but I thought it was really interesting, and it reminded me a lot of a technique that we use here at the Academy is a SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Yeah.
And as you know, there have been some in 20 years. The employees are almost all still the same. Everybody, knock wood, please. But there's been a lot of outside industry change. I made my dog bark by knocking on my desk. I'm sorry. But we went from idle V2 to idle V3 to idle V4, and we've seen the rise and fall of other areas of interest. And so for us, using that SWOT technique has always been a grounding point, right? And a way to sort of to refocus and understand, because external threats are super scary until you start to break them down, in my experience, right? And so reading through what I saw of Lewin, and I too hope I am pronouncing that correctly because this was not something I was familiar with, is to be a great add-on to what we do to our SWOT, because that it gives you some way to sort of measure what those driving forces are. And I like to be able to categorize things, especially, as a business owner, when it comes to risk. I like to, this is a tool I'm going to definitely personally. So thank you, Sean. I'm going to personally
Yeah.
go a lot further into this and see what value it can bring to us.
Yeah. And Janice added, and Janice, I took it and went immediately to the facilitation template and put it at the bottom. Because you found a great site in it. I've looked at the change management coach a couple of times myself. There are templates that they have documents where people will like get the paper printed and then they'll just take post-it notes and everybody will put the post-its on drivers or detractors. And then we can discuss each of the post-its to move it. There's a lot of different aspects in change. Change is one of those areas for people who are looking more information. The big organization for change and also kind of power skills identification is ProSci. ProSci handles management of change, not our ITIL change on moving the computers or changing the patch, but the management of people aspects of change. And they do a lot of talk about both those power skills and a whole bunch of tools. A lot of them are free, but a lot of them are very, 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 very pricey. But still a great place to look. Christian, so glad to have you. And yeah, I think I hope that these takeaways are valuable, but mostly the biggest thing to me is I hope you take this and go, I want to be conscious of communication and listening, and these power skills is something that if I'm aware of, I can practice and improve them. And they're not as cut and dried as I take a class and I'm done. And I hope to see you all in those communities kind of sharing your own aspects of that stuff.
So,
But
and
I'd love to
Sean,
hear what else.
I have to talk to this last takeaway as we asked for questions and comments because the chat has been extra fun today. And as I said to Sean, the origin of the term, oh, typos on me, the origin of the term soft skills and power skills, if nothing else, it's a very fun cocktail party conversation. But more importantly, it's something that you can use hopefully with your leader or your boss that you know that indicates to them you're on top of how important this is. And I actually added the last bullet, the personal branding, because you're if you're here, you have an interest in power skills. And if you have an interest in power skills, then you've probably seen some of what Sean referenced in the very beginning, which is there's all kinds of studies about people with good power skills make more money. Period. End of the story. And so if you have good or you're working on your skills, then I highly recommend that you take a look at your LinkedIn profile or wherever. I feel like for most of us, LinkedIn is the right platform, but whatever your personal platform is where you do your personal professional branding, and look, do you only have hard skills listed or do you have power skills listed? And if you have power skills listed, are they not that they soft skills and power skills, as we learned today, are the same, but they are different. Power skills are enhanced. So if you have soft skills, listen, challenge yourself. How could you maybe update that, modernize it, even if you will, to move toward power skills? So that's my that's always my advice for everyone is look at your LinkedIn profile and think about what you're putting out there. So we are officially at questions. Oh, and Nina, could you put in if you if you're interested in any kind of continual professional development units, PDUs, CPD, CPEs, you can download the letter of attendance for today, and across those platforms, you will get 1 credit toward your continuing education goals. And Nina just posted that in for us. Thank you, Nina.
Nice. I didn't know that.
Listen, people are giving us an hour or maybe today a little bit under an hour of their time, of course, besides your 5 key takeaways. Let's give them all we can, man. You know me.
Yeah, I love that. There's some good things. I'm really glad, and I hope you guys will follow up. There was one that I was going to throw, and I'm thinking, Lisa, as I think about this, it might be fun to do like another cross whatever with on the practicing of power skills. My colleague Ben Forrest and I run kind of an open periodic chance to practice for people who are presenting. And it's just it's a little Toastmastery, but it's more like for people who have content that they want to dry run. We can do it as an office hour, but it might be cool to do that within the academy. That could be fun.
Toastmasters for geeks a little bit. And I say that because I am a geek. You identify as a geek. Probably a lot of
Yeah.
people on this call do. Those sessions are great. I've always gotten a lot out of attending those.
Oh, good. Well, and I'll warn you, we're getting ready our April Fool's Cold Teach, our ninth annual, where we throw something into a mixer and then someone has to teach it. Kind of fun. What other questions do we have? Do we have any? I know some people need to get rolling, and I think that's great. But I definitely want to know if there's questions or anything at all that we can help with, or even if it's stuff that we add on that document. Because that's another thing. If there are questions, the document stays, and I will delete it eventually, but I'll share it with Lisa to send out to participants if she wants, and then
I
we
will.
can, yeah, we can follow up on those questions or anything that happens to come up.
So, Sean, I have a question for you. What
Wasn't
I,
me.
it's I know it wasn't. It was Casey, his wife. Um, the so I have a couple. What's your personal quote mantra? I mean, mine is the my very favorite that I identify with the strongest is there is no traffic jam on the extra mile. And that is a quote from Roger Staubach, who was the Dallas Cowboys quarterback when I was growing up.
Ah, okay. I love that. I don't, mine is just always be learning. And so I'm always hearing that in my head and going, what can I learn from this? What can I do to get better at this? How can I apply this? What can I learn from the current situation? And that's kind of my constantly in the back of my head. Ironically, especially in the ones that are everybody has the meetings that you walk into and you're like, oh. But those are the ones where I'm like, okay, what can I pull out of this that could be good on my LinkedIn profile? What can I pull out
Mhm.
of this that I could learn from that could be another class that I could either go study a book or podcast I could look up to get better? So
Well, and you really are so very good at that. Years and years ago, I'm 15 years ago, maybe, I was at an ITSMF conference and a practitioner who was a leader, Angelica King is her name. Some of you may know her. She's amazing. And she wasn't a client of mine. I went into her presentation and she said words that really had a very positive impact here at the Academy, which was what they do, what she does with her team is discuss, decide, champion. And so what that meant was everyone's voice. Because I used to say, like, my door is literally and figuratively always open, right? And when we were first growing the academy, we had growing pains. We went from 2 people to 18 people in pretty quick order and lots of things. And we had a lot to learn. And so hearing those words were really, really impactful for me because everybody had a chance to voice. So the business reason or the problem or whatever it was, I would state, and then everyone's opinions and thoughts, and there were no bad ideas. But in the end, we would decide on something. And at the end of it, champion became very important. So no one walked out of the room saying, well, can you believe Lisa wants to do that? Can you believe that training team wants to do that? And it really was very impactful. So whenever I'm sharing and having conversations like this, and in case somebody else needs to hear that, that was a thing I needed to hear that is, really, really helped me along the way. So that's kind of my
I
favorite.
love that. So, and I'm going, wait, it was discuss, debate, and decide? No.
No, discuss, decide, champion. And
Oh,
what
champion.
did
Okay.
happen, and listen, who worked with, you're gonna get some of this, but there was one person who her wiring was a little bit more um half empty than the majority of our team. And she really did have the in the meeting, yes, 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 and then walk out and can you believe Lisa's doing that, or was that bad, or whatever. And what happened, just frankly, the end result of it was the rest of the team formed around her and said, wait, in that room, we all had our chance and we're championing this idea because collectively we built this idea. And so they self-corrected my problem She wasn't a problem employee at all. She was an awesome employee, but they self-corrected a team situation for very much the better. And it's because I heard Angelica King say, discuss, decide, champion, and learned it and learned how to do it over the years. It is a good day, Glynis. When you learn something new, it is fun. I agree. 20 years in, it's every day's different. Every day's a little bit the same, and finding new things to get excited about, and new things to learn personally and professionally, it makes it all worthwhile to me.
Right. It's funny. I was just typing that back because it makes me think about the different roles I've had and then which ones I have next. I've been fortunate in that I think the role though it's a consistent role, the dynamic has changed. It's been so interesting to hear the change from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side kind of be realized. I think COVID possibly accelerated that, but I think we were moving towards that very much faster, where I don't know how often we hear someone who just sits in the front of the room and lectures anymore, because we don't have the patience or time for it, and we can get the information in 60 seconds or less on TikTok. So that engagement piece is becoming finally a piece that we don't just talk about, but we do. So it's kind of fun to see that evolve. But
Yes, I agree. I'm very hopeful that, I'm a huge believer in simulations. And over all the years, there have been a lot of companies that we've had the pleasure of working with that honestly, I felt like a simulation would do them provide a lot more value than one more certification class on the same thing. And we're starting to see a rise in people because everybody believes it. Everybody wants to do simulations, but then when it comes down to budget time, the certification class gets kept and the simulation often doesn't. But I think, and I'm going to be using that quote too, because I think that's a great way to help people understand, because people understand the value of simulation, but they don't understand the investment in a game. And I'm hopeful that we're finally getting past that because, again, I did it at the Apollo 13 simulation 20 years ago. I took 3 learnings out of that I still talk about all the time. And
oh,
listen, I'm an idle service manager. I'm an idle expert. I don't quote. No, I don't work in idle every day either. To be fair, I'm not just discounting at all idle or any certification training. But 20 years later, to have incorporated those kind of learnings into what I'm still doing today, because it's not a single platform or a single framework because it's a power skill, not a hard skill.
yep. And you can run it
There
every
you have
time.
it.
And oh, that's interesting. Valerie, I got to use some of the G2, G3, but never got to work with Apollo ones. So we had the race for the finish. And there was another one that was a business. Geez, I can't remember what it was, and I was authorized to facilitate it.
The manage engine, not manage
Yes.
engine, the
Yeah.
Formula One.
Formula One, right.
Yeah, the Formula
And
One. Yeah.
yeah. And honestly, Valerie, to that end, within my organization, we've built quite a few. And my wife and I have worked with a few sales simulations, and they're actually kind of interesting too. Because with the sales simulations, they drum. There's an organization called BTS. I think it's BTS Pulse. They're constantly drumming the urgency on the sales side of things. So that's like a high pressure, high stress, and that's another one floating around. I
I'd
don't know.
forgotten about that. She came into one of your speakeasies and
Yes.
did a presentation, and it was, God, it was really interesting. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, they're fun. They do a lot of really neat stuff. So Valerie, yeah, I hate to just share a bunch with you and not give you a favorite, but there are some good ones out there. I wish I'd gotten to do Apollo, but Lisa, confession, never got to do the Apollo project. Met the gentleman
Maybe,
through one of yours sessions.
yeah.
And thought, man, I want to do this, and never got to.
Well, it's been updated. It's still a thing we do. The Apollo Mars lander, which is good, but nothing's ever going to beat Apollo for me personally.
Okay.
And it's funny that we're talking about the Formula One, because there's a new one that we're looking at, I mean, in the next couple of weeks, called Cargo, and it's ITSM essential skills. So
Wow.
I think we're going to be, I'm starting the process of making the decision to onboard, but I mean, I think that car is going to go, pun intended.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Listen, I can get you invited to the Train the Trainer for that, for just because you love to learn. So
Okay.
we'll
Boy,
do that.
I rubs hands together and goes, wait, what? I could try something that would be fun. We
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think simulations is, I mean, just any of them are hot. But the other thing, cool, and I don't know if you've ever played with this for you or anyone else, since AI is always the hot topic. This, by the way, is why power skills are even more important, because it's great that I can type anything into ChatGPT, but I need to talk to people and interact with people to get the insights to tell ChatGPT what I need it to do. But one of the great things you can do with large language learning models is invent simulations with them. And I don't know if you've ever played with that, Lisa, but that is
Yes.
wild. Yeah. Casey and I started running through scenarios where when you understand their persona, you can say, help me describe a simulated game for these people in these contexts.
I love
Oh
that.
yeah, like that quote. Yeah. Um,
Sean, Sean, you just gave me such a good idea. First of all, I see that Dennis, one of our instructors, is on, and Dennis, there you just heard about cargo, because I already have in my mind's eye that you're lead trainer on it, my friend. So we'll talk later about that. And Sean, what a great idea, because we brought back I Am the Incident, which is it's not a simulation, but it's an in-class exercise. And I've been thinking about how to make it even so the contents of it is great, but back in the day, back in V2 and V3, in the physical classroom, somebody would get a t-shirt and it legit said, as you know, Sean, I am the incident. And we would have the whole classroom sit in a circle, and the incident would move as different, everyone got cards, and those cards would trigger. And so it was time for card 7, and card 7, now this happened. And so people could visualize the incident, and when it became a known error, when it became a problem. And so in the early days of IDLE 4 Foundation, there just wasn't breathing room to do it. But we last year deconstructed the class, got I Am the Incident back in. Pass rates are fantastic, better than ever. And now I want to improve the simulation piece of it. And I hadn't thought about, and you know how much I use ChatGPT for all the things. And I have
oh
friends
yeah.
with really good large learning capabilities that I could, including you, that I could collaborate with. Oh, I'm doing it. What a great, there's my takeaway for today. I hope everyone got as great of a takeaway as I did. It is noon. So it is time to go. Next month, we are having Charlie Bentz, our friend with Forrester. He's coming in and talking about platform engineering and architecture, which is going to be very interesting. And the month after that, Mark Hinkle, who is my favorite guru in the AI space, because what he puts out is stuff that is digestible, that I can do things with. Mark Hinkle is going to be our May webinar presenter, and the topic is going to be AI and its impact today, tomorrow, and in the future on IT service management. So we'll thank you all for joining us. I hope everyone, like I said, got as much and enjoyed as much as I did. And we will see you guys all again, hopefully next month.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.
Yes.
Really good to meet
Make it
everybody.
a great day, everyone. Thanks, Sean. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
Oh, you got a party feedback. I love that. Talk to you later. Bye.